for this session, we have with us the Dean of the Business School.
No, wait a minute. Government.
Oh, sorry, sorry. Dean of the Government and Public Policy, Professor R. Sudarshan. Professor R. Sudarshan is also a Rhodes Scholar. Wow. And he has done his master's in economics from the School of Economics. And then he's got a degree from the Oxford University, a master's in politics. As far as he was also elected as a research fellowship at the St. John's College, University of Cambridge. He had a very, very distinguished career actually. In 1983, he was a visiting scholar in the School of International Development, University of Anglia.
East Anglia.
East Anglia. In 1984, he served in the Ford Foundation South Asia office in New Delhi as an assistant representative and the program officer for human rights and social justice. In 1991, he joined UNDP in India as a senior economist and assistant representative for governance and public policy. In 2000, he served UNDP in Jakarta as its senior governance advisor. In 2002, he was appointed as a policy advisor for justice, governance, in the UNDP Oslo Governance Center. This is in a nutshell brief about what Professor Sudarshan is, but then has got a long list of write-ups also.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. That ritual is over. So I'm very happy to be with all of you. I've been asked to talk about sort of how India is governed and something about India's public policy. So how many of you are interested in public policy per se? 2, 3. Yeah. Okay. I mean, well, since it's public policy, technically. Or logically, all of us should be interested in public policy because we're all members of a public. And public policy is anything that affects the general public. And so in as much as we are people, we should take an interest in public policy, even though we may not wish to kind of specialize in it or have any particular expertise, but it's a matter of concern since public policies affect people. And so it's a field that should interest everyone to a greater or lesser extent. But what is the main disciplines that you're focusing on? Many of you, is it law? I mean, are you all of you lawyers?
Yeah. Law students.
Huh? All of you are law students. From which universities? Okay, so there's another lot from ANU. They are not lawyers.
Some of them are.
Everyone is students. Yeah, not everyone's studying law though.
Yeah,
Oh.
everyone here is studying law, but everyone from there.
All right, okay. So, well, the thing is that, sorry about this. Public policy is a discipline or a field of study that is rather closely related to law, in the sense that any public policy that has to, in order to be implemented or enforced, has to be cast in the form of a law to have authority, right? So it should be either a statute passed as an act of a legislature, or it could be a constitutional provision, or it could be an executive order with the authority of the cabinet or the minister. So all public policy is actually couched in law. So a great deal of what you will have to contend with as lawyers is about whether public policies which get challenged because they violate human rights, or because they are unclear, or because they discriminate against different sections of the people. These are all grounds for legal challenges to public policy. So it's quite logical. As lawyers, you should be interested in public policy. But let me get an idea of what you think is public policy. What is public policy? What do you think it is? What is it? Have an attempt at a definition. I mean, it's like, we all, there's no set of clear words that define it. We all roughly know what it means. It's like the judges say, you know obscenity when you see it, but it's very difficult to define it. But public policy, what words would you use to describe it?
You say like a rationale behind like making a law, like the reason for making a law, the considerations in the community.
It could be, but it's not primarily law driven, no? I mean, it gets translated into law after it's formulated, but what is public policy?
If I may.
Yes, please.
Well, there's probably two ways you could use the term, but maybe the one that's used in judgments is to describe an ideal or a tactic which is used in the interest of the public. Say the public policy could be to bring down interest rates. So the tactic is basically to stimulate the economy. So the purpose of it is, but the public policy is to lower interest rates.
Yeah, okay, that's an illustration. It's an illustration of public policy, a policy intended to lower interest rates because some benefits are anticipated by so doing. So that's an example of public policy, but how would you characterize public policy itself? Well, really, public policy is about, is like any policy. I mean, let's leave out the public for a bit. The public is there because these are policies that affect everybody, affect the people at large. Therefore, it's called public policy, but it's a policy. So what is a policy? I mean, that probably is easier to get a handle on. What do you think is a policy? What do policies do? Why are they there?
Are they like a unified ideal, which a group, like a party, basically?
Yeah, well, what if it's a party, a unified ideal? It's an ideology. A policy is simply something that is meant to influence the behavior of people. That's all. So if parents say to their school-going child that they should be in bed by 10 o'clock and should stop watching television by 8, they are laying down a policy at home, and that policy is expected to influence the behavior of the children, right? So the authority of the policy is the fact that it's the parents who are decreeing it, right? It's not a legislature. But the intention is that people will conform to it and change their behavior if they were inclined to behave otherwise. So it's anything really that influences behavior. To have a policy, say, which in fact has been tried in Delhi because of this awful pollution, that on odd days of the calendar, you will have cars having odd number plates on the road, and even numbered plates will not be allowed to be on the road. And on even dates, even numbered plate. No. So if you have that's a policy, right? What does it do? It's meant to influence behavior. If I happen to have a car that had an odd number, I couldn't take it out on a date on the 8th, which is an even number, right? And so why do you do this? You want to influence the behavior of drivers, motorists, so that they don't show up, and you want to reduce pollution because the total number of vehicles in an odd-even policy would be, half what they might otherwise have been on the road, right, on any given day. So that's a policy. It's meant to influence behavior. All policies are really that. They affect behavior. So an interest rate policy that he mentioned is a policy that is meant to affect the behavior of banks. So if the policy has stipulated a certain range within which interest rates should be maintained, which could be an order of the central bank of the country, then all the banking system must conform to that, and their behavior is affected by that policy. So it's very simply, it's anything that influences human behavior. And the assumption is that we have policies because we want to influence human behavior for the better. We want people to, behave better. I mean, say policies that you will not use plastic bags in supermarkets or to carry your stuff, that sort of thing. You want to minimize the use of plastic because it's not biodegradable. That's a policy. And so it can be implemented in various ways. Usually you have to have some incentive. So you'd say that we'll charge you more if you want a plastic carrier bag. And the extra charge is a disincentive. You say, okay, I might as well bring my own bag to the supermarket, a cloth bag or a plastic bag if I happen to have one, instead of having to pay more for it. Those sorts of things are policies, right, which influence behavior. And so much of what government does is public policy, because the governments are there to act in the interests of the public, to advance the welfare of people. And the method by which they can do that is by formulating and implementing policies. And so there are a number of considerations that arise as to, how do you formulate a policy? When do you formulate a policy? So when would you want to have a policy? I mean, what is the start of a policy? How do you think policies usually get started?
A change in social context.
A change in?
Social context.
Contact.
Social context.
Context.
Yeah.
Such as example?
Different values.
Well, I mean, Australia recently passed a major policy in permitting same-sex marriages, right? Now, it was possible to do that because there's been a build-up to it, and a recognition that individuals needn't only be attracted to persons of the opposite sex, and that you can have companionship, bonding, and friendship, and all that goes with the institution of the family between two members of the same sex, and it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody from the opposite sex, right? Now, when there's a larger public perception of this being normal, ordinary, natural, it's possible to have a policy. I mean, we didn't have a policy of that kind because there's been a long history of regarding such affections as somehow against nature. And that's, a view that has been entrenched by many propagators of religious faiths as unnatural behavior in human beings. And so when that context changes and there's more awareness of the fact that this is, nothing very extraordinary, and there are a large number of people who are affected in this, and not affected, there are a large number of people who feel that way, you should have a policy that's congenial to their interests, right? So that explains the policy. So what happens is there's usually a problem that a policy addresses. And the problem in this case, to take this example, is that when you didn't permit it, you had legislation that criminalized homosexual behavior. And it's still a problem in India. So we're talking about Indian policies. India has a penal code that was drafted in 1860. And so you can see that it was drafted in a Victorian era. And, you know, we all know when somebody says, oh, it's called Victorian morality, rather prudish is the kind of prevailing sentiment of that era. So you had in the penal code in India, it said it's a criminal offense, you know, for there to be sexual relations between two men. If for some reason it doesn't say that about women, but sexual relations between two men or between a person and an animal, all these are natural acts of sexuality, and they are criminalized. In other words, you could be arrested and sent to jail. Now, what it means is that, you know, it makes people vulnerable. So if two young men are, you know, holding hands in a park, it's possible for a police official to say that, you know, he anticipated that they had engaged in a public display of affection, and that probably suggested that they were engaging in unnatural sex and therefore criminal. Yeah.
What I've noticed in my time while I've been in India is that the affection towards male and male is quite, you know, normalized, I guess you could say. It's not sexual in any context.
Yes.
Like holding hands and rubbing and all that sort of technically affectionate behaviour. How does the, I guess, Indian society reconcile that behaviour compared to, I guess, affectionate and sexual behaviour?
No, you see, the thing is, it's not, firstly, I have to say the Indian Penal Code was not drafted by Indians. The Indian Penal Code was legislated in Westminster in London as an act governing the country, right? So it's really motivated by Victorian behavior. And in Victorian England, you would be considered rather queer if you held hands with a person of, you know, if two boys put an arm around each other's shoulders and strolled on the street, that would be considered rather weird. It's very common in India. People do that all the time without there being any hint of any sexuality involved. There could be, but most often there isn't. It's simply how people behave, right? So, but we are still contending with this. This is a problem because it's section 377 of the Penal Code. And what happened was a lot of groups, and this is how policy begins, because there is a problem. The problem is that people get discriminated against. I mean, they are somehow seen as not ordinary, normal people. And so it encourages that kind of a thing. And so, and it's sort of strengthened by religious beliefs. So if in Islam, it's against the law of nature, and that, never mind the fact that a great deal of poetry that comes from Persia and Arabia talk about with the intensity and passion of love between men. That's there in their poetry, which means it's a part of society. You know, in Afghanistan, it's a handsome young man is an object of lust in its literature, but in its religion, it's against the faith. So there will be. So if you said it's an Islamic republic, you will have a law that criminalizes sexual contact between persons of the same sex. Well, for some reason, as I say, even in Islamic countries, they don't do that about women. They only do that for men. I don't know. I mean, somehow women's behavior is assumed to be, I mean, as in many definitions of adultery, a woman cannot be guilty of adultery. Adultery is an offense of the man, and it's a ground for the woman to ask for a divorce on grounds of adultery. So there is this discrimination in terms of how the genders are dealt with in religions and in secular law in most countries. But my question was, how does a public policy begin? Why is there a need for a policy? The need for a policy usually arises with a problem. And in this case, the problem is that gays and or homosexuals, whatever term we use, feel that or have felt that they've been discriminated against in society. And that, this is a kind of discrimination that's in a way subtle. It's like you apply for a job and the people interviewing you think that your behavior suggests that, your posture or whatever suggests that you are, the prejudicial term is poofta or something like that, you don't get the job. I mean, because the society as a whole has not sanctioned this as a natural part of many human beings. So you have a problem, and so there are protests, there are movements, you form groups called LGBT, and there are many more acronyms added to that, and you say, this discrimination must stop. And so you call upon the state to formulate a policy. So what happened in India is that the legislature did not bother about this. It's remained in the penal code that homosexual conduct, sexual conduct is a crime. And somebody went to the court. There's a NGO called the Naz Foundation that works with homosexuals and lesbians and transgendered people. And they went to court saying this is violative of the fundamental rights of a person. And therefore, this particular provision in the penal code should be struck down as violating the fundamental rights of people in the Constitution. Firstly, right to equality, and secondly, the right to life. Thirdly, the right to pursue, believe what you wish to believe, freedom of conscience, and so on. So all of these, and the High Court upheld this charge and struck down the Section 3.7, the Delhi High Court did, as unconstitutional. But the state went in appeal against this judgment, and the Supreme Court reversed the judgment of the High Court. And so we are back to the situation where Section 377 is valid law, and this behavior is criminal. And so now what's happened is, this is the very latest news. 4 days ago, the Supreme Court said it will revisit this decision with a larger bench of judges to examine the matter once again. So here what's happening is policy is being made by the courts. The Supreme Court's reason for overturning the Delhi High Court decision was that it's not a good thing for a court to make public policy. And that since it's a policy that affects the people, it affects their sentiments, it affects their beliefs, it should be done by a legislature, which has representatives elected by the people in a democracy. And therefore, it's not for the courts to say whether this is this criminal provision is right or wrong. The Supreme Court initially held it is for India's Parliament to decree that. And so let Parliament decide. But you see, the thing is that, you know, you may never get a parliament that kind of agrees upon and decides this. And so the Supreme Court of India more recently, about a month ago, delivered a very important judgment claiming that there is a right to privacy as part of the right to life. The Constitution in India has a provision that says that all persons it's called the right to life, and the provision simply says that no person will be deprived of his life or liberty except according to procedure established by law. So that's called the right to life, but the Supreme Court over time in India has sort of interpreted what it means to have a right to life by adding other things which are not explicitly stated. So there's no right to privacy as such in the Constitution, but their view was that if you wanted a life with dignity, your dignity entailed that you have a sense of privacy, and that your behavior, particularly your sexual behavior, is your business and it's your private matter, and it shouldn't bother others. It's not of any public interest. And therefore, because that decision saying that there is a right to privacy is inherent in the right to life in the Constitution was recently made, it gives a chance to revisit the criminal provision.
How did the Supreme Court decide to revisit it? Was there a case brought before it, or did they just decide to review their previous decision? Do they have that power?
There was a petition calling for a review of the decision of the Supreme Court overturning the decision of the Delhi High Court. So there was a review petition.
And is that
So-
like a formal process?
Yes, it's a formal process. It's a formal process brought by the same NGO that brought the initial case. So that NGO and its lawyers requested the Supreme Court, after the privacy judgment, to revisit the case, because now that the court has held that there is a right to privacy, you can use that and say, you know, should the state be peering into, the private affairs or the bedrooms of people to figure out whether they are engaging in some unnatural sexual conduct that's a crime. You know, it ought not to do that. And therefore, if you had a provision that said this, that sexual contact between two men is unnatural and criminal, that means somebody is going to watch and get the evidence of their sexual contact, which means their right to privacy would necessarily be violated. And now that we've established that there is a right to privacy in the Constitution of India, read into the right to life and right to life and dignity, the court has agreed to revisit. And in all probability, we expect that the court will overturn its earlier decision by a larger bench, and we'd have got rid of a Victorian provision, right? So this is an example of how you begin, all policies, whether made by a court in this case or by a parliament, begin with addressing a problem. So you first identify a problem and you say, now how do we deal with this problem, right? So, and to get a recognition of the problem itself is a big job. You've got to bring it onto the political agenda for decision making. Very often the way, power is exercised in countries, societies, is not to bring something onto the political agenda, not to make it seem there's a problem, right? So obviously, straight people will think that what's the problem, right? I mean, they don't feel any discrimination. It's the other lot that's feeling discrimination, but since the majority of the people are generally straight or whatever, they are the ones in power, they may think, oh, there's no problem. I mean, why rake up an issue that's, it may affect a small minority and, it's not a big matter, which is the attitude of the Indian Parliament. The reason why it did not amend the penal code and get rid of this provision is because there may be the odd people there. What does it matter? But the point about human rights is that it doesn't matter, that it's just the one person. A right is a trump card. I mean, you cannot violate anybody's right. And so the important part is, how do you bring a policy onto the decision-making agenda, right? So you've got to understand a little bit about how power works, and how we have to study how power is exercised in society. Normally we say, okay, who's got power in this university? Oh, we say, all right, the vice chancellor makes decisions. He can make rules that govern policies for the university. So he's exercising power, right? So when we study exercise of power, we look to a person in authority and ask, what has that person done, right? But there may be a group of people who engage in the exercise of power, but behind the scenes, by making sure that something is not acted upon, something just doesn't come onto the decision-making agenda. That's a subtle exercise of power. It's a hidden exercise of power, but nonetheless, it's power, right? So, and you get this in many contexts, and you won't find it because no one has sort of issued a decision, right? It's like there's a story in Sherlock Holmes about why the hound did not bark, right? So you have to be a Sherlock Holmes to ask, why didn't this dog not bark, right? Normally, you have to, so why is it that something has not come on the decision-making agenda? It isn't that it's not there as a problem. It is that some people are making a very conscious effort to keep it out of the political agenda so that you don't rock the boat. I mean, that's a phrase we use, let's not rock the boat, let's keep quiet about it, and so on. So, for instance, it may well be, that the Catholic Church knew for a very, very long time that some of its priests were molesting and abusing children, right? They knew it, but, and the Holy Father, the Pope, could have issued a decree condemning it, dismissing these people, but it's embarrassing, it's awkward. So why rock the boat? Let's keep quiet about it. It'll go away. The offender can be asked to pray in repentance and ask for forgiveness, and that sort of attitude. So you're not making a decision, you're pushing it away, right? So that's a very subtle form of exercise of power. But there's another form by which power is exercised, which is even more insidious, and that is when you get the victim of something to actually think that the exploiter is a benefactor. Can you think of some examples of that? Where someone's affected and has been victimized, but the victim thinks that the perpetrator of the exploitation is actually good. You see, this is where you're working on the consciousness of people. I mean, Marx called it false consciousness, right? It's about, say, for instance, a good example in India is I used to I used to work on child labor and trying to eliminate child labor. And there's one place in India where there's a high concentration of child labor. It's a town called Shivakasi in South India. And what they do there is they make fire matches and firecrackers, fireworks. So nearly all of the matches sold in India are made in this one town called Shivakasi. It's another matter that nearly all of the calendars, the printed calendars, are also produced in this one town called Shivakasi. And in Shivakasi, in the matchwork industry and the fireworks industry, only children are employed for the most part. And then, so when I went there, and I visited the homes of these children, they would be sent a bus that will reach their home about 4 o'clock in the morning, and these children would be huddled into this bus, and they'd be driven off to the factory. They'd be given a little breakfast when they reach the factory, and they begin work by 6. And they work till 6 in the evening. And they are bussed back and they reach their homes about 8 in the evening. And the next day, it's again the same routine, 4 a.m., children in the bus, 12 hours of work in the factory. Yeah.
At what age would these children be?
These children are about 12, 14, right? Yeah. Or sometimes even as young as 6.
This is in Tamil Nadu, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you go to the homes of the, I've been to many of the homes of these children, and their parents have a photograph along with the gods that they worship, a photograph of the owner of the match industry that employs the children. And they say, but for this benefactor, our family would be starving. He has given a job to our children, and the earnings of the children is what makes us survive, because we have no other means of livelihood. And therefore they're not outraged and angry that this factory owner is exploiting their children, making them work 12 hours and paying them very low wages, because the wages for children are much less than you would have to pay an adult.
Is there a reason why this Australian or whoever is employing the children? Like, why don't the parents ask for a job?
Why?
Like, why wouldn't he be employing the parents or people over 18 rather than the children? Is it just the way around?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't.
The parents of these children, they work themselves as well?
No, they don't. You see, the problem is that they don't have any land, so they can't farm, and they don't get work in other people's farms. They are very poor. Now, if they tried hard, they probably could get other jobs, right? But they've quite got used to this way of life, where they pack off their children to go and earn some money. And they themselves are sort of, there could be any kind of a motive, but, they are not interested in the fact that the future of these children is completely compromised. They have no education. And so it is, you normally think that, parents are full of human kindness and care for their children. But, human beings are human beings, and venality and selfishness is very widespread. It could be selfishness at the expense of their own children, So you don't find this everywhere. You find, other poor people don't send their children to work, right? So you've got to ask the question, why is it that it's happening in certain places? Why not elsewhere? But the point I'm trying to make is that the employers of these children have made the families that they are exploiting think they are their benefactors, when the reality is they are their exploiters, right? And so, because they are convinced they are their benefactors, they don't form a protest and they don't go and complain to the government that, their children are taken at 4 in the morning and come home at 8 in the evening and exploited by these people, right? So you have to have some NGOs and others doing that, because the victims themselves are not taking up cudgels against their exploitation. And that's a very insidious form of exercise of power. I mean, you could see this. I mean, when there was slavery in in many parts of the world, or in the United States, particularly, you have these great novels, Gone with the Wind and so on. You had a certain loyalty on the part of the slaves. I mean, they considered themselves to be part of the family in a way. The Tom Brown sort of syndrome. They considered themselves as that their masters were wonderfully great people, and that it's their lot in life to be slaves, but nonetheless they looked up to and held in high esteem their owners, right? And it can happen. So we have to understand first that in order for something to come onto the policy agenda, you have to see how it happens, because there are many ways by which power is exercised that prevent something from coming to the policy agenda, right? And so if you think about it, for instance, there was child labor in England, but no child labor in Scotland at the same time. Children were sent down coal mines in England, and you have harrowing accounts of the exploitation of children in coal mines in the country, or working as chimney sweeps because they were small. They could be sent up chimneys to clean the soot and widen the chimney. Now you have accounts of this in Charles Dickens. And in fact, Charles Dickens's novels created a consciousness about this. The Great Reform Act in England came about because people were reading novels by Charles Dickens, which were serialized in magazines, and felt that this is terribly wrong. Oliver Cromwell, Oliver Twist, whatever. You got a outrage in people because of the writings of Dickens and others. In Scotland, there was no child labor. Why not? Because you see, the Scots are Presbyterians, and the Presbyterian Church believed that children should be able to read the Gospel, to read the Bible. And if they couldn't read the Bible, they would be subject to the temptations of Satan. And to prevent satanic temptations, the child should be able to read the Holy Book. Now, if you got to be able to read the Holy Book, you've got to go to school to learn to read and write. And since this conviction that it is absolutely essential for the child to read the Holy Book is so strong in a Presbyterian society, they sent their children to school instead of sending them to work in a coal mine. But the Church of England didn't have that kind of hallowed status for being able to read the gospel for oneself. It's all right, you went to church and be a good boy, but go and work, right? So that was the attitude in England. So in England, child labor stopped because of a societal consciousness, a change in societies, just as, people got rid of slavery. Because for a long time, slavery was assumed to be a natural condition. Aristotle in Greece assumes it to be a natural condition. So when Aristotle talks about the freedoms of the city and governing of the great city in his politics, those are not rights that are available to slaves. And it's also assumed for a long time that, to wait and serve is the natural condition for women. They look after children, mind the house, wait upon the family. This is a natural condition for women. Why are they wanting to be engine drivers or pilots or go and be Marines? Those are all unnatural behavior for women. Now, that kind of belief was very widespread and prevalent, and that kind of patriarchy has still not gone away. You got to really do some soul searching, each of us, as to whether or not we have these patriarchal instincts in us, because it's sort of embedded in your subconscious, and you may not even be aware that you're being very patriarchal, because the persistence of patriarchy over so many generations has been so deeply rooted that it's difficult to sort of just say you can shake it off in one generation. It takes a lot of effort. So policy comes onto the agenda only when there is an acknowledgement of a problem and you think that it can be solved. The next thing you do is to say, is there a solution to the problem? You got to analyze, how do you solve the problem, right? And so, for instance, Delhi pollution, the government decided it will solve the problem by experimenting with this odd even rule. But after some time, after they did this for 15 days, they then did tests, and they found it made very little difference to pollution, actually, because the pollution is caused not just by motor vehicles. And so you have the number of motor vehicles on the road, but the pollution levels did not come down dramatically. So to tackle pollution in the city, saying that half the motor vehicles with odd or even numbers can't ply on odd or even days is not a good policy. But however, people in Delhi were very pleased with it because the congestion on the roads diminished. And so those who were able to reach from point A to point B were able to do that much faster than on a normal day when all the vehicles are on the road. So it solved congestion. So if your policy goal is to reduce congestion on the roads, this is a good policy. But if your policy goal is to reduce pollution, it's not a very good policy because it doesn't affect pollution. So you've got to understand what is the right solution to the problem, which before you formulate and enforce a policy. Very often, what we think would be the solution doesn't turn out to be the solution. I mean, so Delhi government thought, having the motor vehicles in the city would make a significant difference to pollution, and it did not. So that's not a good thing. So we've got to find out what is a good solution to the problem, because it's the solution that is the policy, because that's what is going to change behavior. And so can you think of some examples where there's been a policy that was intended to have its effect but didn't? I mean, anything from your experience?